Hello YouTubers! I will be going through this week's games, review last week's tips and leaderboard of our footy tip comp, and also go through my Brownlow Votes for season 2025. Let's look at my Brownlow Votes after round 7. In top spot with 13 votes is B. Smith, Geelong, what a recruit from the Western Bulldogs. In tied for second spot are N. Dacos, Collingwood, and A. Brayshaw, Fremantle, both on 11 votes. And in tied for fourth spot on 10 votes are 3 players: C. Sarong, Fremantle, Z. Merritt, Essendon, and L. Neil, Brisbane Lions. These are my top 5 for the 2025 Brownlow Votes after round 7. My tips for round 7 were, I got 7 out of 9 correct. That was pretty awesome. However, I got the Giants losing to the West Bulldogs at home in Canberra, and on Sunday, Carlton. What an upset. A magnificent win over the Cats. They were the 2 games that I got wrong for this week. Let's look at the Talking Everything AFL leaderboard. In top spot on 44 votes is Patrick L32, and in second spot with 42 votes you got me, Talking Everything AFL, and in third spot with 41 votes is Potter1, and in fourth spot I am Hacks with 40 votes. Let's see my selection for round 8. Come on, let's go. Yeah. Before we continue, I would like to ask for a very small favour. If you enjoyed this AFL content, please take a sec to subscribe to the channel and like the video. That would be awesome. Okay, let's return back to the show. The first game of the week is between Essendon and Nth Melbourne Kangaroos, played at Marvel Stadium on a Thursday night. Last week, the Bombers lost to Collingwood by 41 points in Anzac Day, and Nth Melbourne had a competitive 9-point loss to Port Adelaide Power at Adelaide Oval last week. The players in the mix for the Bombers are Tasassis, Hayes and El Hawali. For the Kangas, their players in the mix are Core, Marley and Hanson Jr. The players injured for the Bombers are Brian, Caldwell, Clark, Cox, Draper, Edwards, Goofy, Leveed and Parrish with a calf injury. For the Kangaroos, they'll be missing Common Jones, George, Goda, Fisher and Matt Whitlock. Where the game will be won at is Essendon's forward line and Nth Melbourne's defence. In the forward line for the Bombers, you got Gresham, Hobbs, Martin, Kako, Wright and Langford. For the Kangas, you got McDonald, Daniel, Tucker, Archer, Dawson and Comrade in their defence. And just looking at that, I believe that the Bombers have too much firing power for the Nth Melbourne defenders, and I expect the Bombers to kick a lot of goals in this game. And therefore, I'm going to tip the Bombers to beat the Kangaroos by 22 points for this game. The next game is between St Kilda and Fremantle Dockers, played on a Friday night at Marvel Stadium. Last week, the Saints lost to the Brisbane Lions at home by 45 points, and Freo had a good win on Anzac Day evening against the Adelaide Crows by 18 points. The players in the mix for the Saints are Boxshell, Boyd and McLennan. For the Dockers, their players in the mix are Aish, Reddy and Banfield. The players injured for the Saints are Butler, Cordy, Dow, King, Philippou and Saad. For the Dockers, they'll be missing Brody, Fife, Jackson, Jones, O'Driscoll, Sturp, lost to suspension, Walker and Walters. Where the game will be won at, it's in the midfield. For St Kilda, in ruck midfield, you have Marshall, McRae, Steele, Hill, Sinclair and Wood. For Freo, you got Darcy in ruck, Sarong, Brayshaw, Sharp, Young and Johnson. And the midfield is Fremantle's strength. Just looking at the St Kilda's midfield compared to Freo, the two teams are pretty even, and you got the hard inside mids of McRae and Steele, and I reckon those 2 players can stop Sarong and Brayshaw or Fremantle. And if they get enough inside 50 to Sharman and Carmedes, they'll kick a big score and win the game. And therefore, I'm going to tip the Saints to beat Fremantle Dockers by 15 points, as in the last 2 games they've had some poor losses, and I just expect the Saints to be fired up on a big game Friday night on national TV. The next game of the week is between the Western Bulldogs and Port Adelaide, played on a Saturday lunchtime at Mars Stadium in Ballarat. Last week, the Doggies had an awesome win against the GWS Giants and won by 32 points, where they kept the Giants goalless in the third quarter. The Power had a 9-point win against Nth Melbourne at home at Adelaide Oval. The players in the mix for the Doggies are Baker, Jones and Duray. For the Power, their players in the mix are Atkins, Evans and Jackson. The players injured for the Doggies are Caulfield, Darcy, Garcia, McNeil, Chalor, Waitman and Vandermeer. Some big players out. For the Power, they'll be missing Burton, Lukosius and Marshall. Where the game will be won at is the Western Bulldogs full line and the Port Adelaide Power's defence. In the full line for the Doggies, you got Vandermeer, O'Donnell, Kennedy, West, Norton and Sanders. In defence for the Power, you got Rosie, Ragalia, Farrell, Bergman, Alir and Jones. Given that the game is played at Ballarat and assuming it's going to be a pretty windy day where the ball will be a lot on the ground in the full line or along the ground in the game in general, but when the ball goes in the full line for the Doggies, it'll be on the ground where Norton's the only marking forward, surrounded by the small to medium forwards, and I believe that the Bulldogs will provide a lot of inside 50 pressure and the time of the ball will be staying a lot in their full line and they will kick more goals than the Power. Therefore, I'm going to select the Doggies to beat the Port Adelaide Power by 12 points. The next game is between the Adelaide Crows and Carlton Blues, played on a Saturday afternoon. The players in the mix for the Crows are Fogarty, Pedler, Butts, Shaw and Murphy. For Carlton, their players in the mix are Young, Cow and Doherty. The players injured for the Crows are Murray, Strawn, Hinge might be suspended, and Philfoot might be in doubt with a hand injury. For the Blues, their players injured are Sincola, Fantasia, Kemp, Newman and Jagger Smith. Where the game will be won at, it's the midfield of both sides. For the Crows, in midfield ruck, or ruck midfield I should say, you got O'Brien, Sergo, Rankin, Cumming, Dawson and Peatling. For the Blues, you got DeConning, who's been awesome this year, with the midfields of Walsh, Hewitt, Sarah, Cripps and Hollands. Just looking at the two teams of midfield, it's pretty even I reckon, but counts with the class of Cripps, but the Crows can use Dawson to tag him if they prefer to do that. But the main difference in this midfield is Rankin, who's got X factor and speed, and I believe having that extra point of different speed will provide enough inside 50 to the potent Crows forward line if I'm expecting Fogarty to return, and therefore I'm going to select the Crows to beat the Blues by 25 points. The next game, played on the Saturday night at the MCG, is between Collingwood and Geelong. I reckon this game's going to be a classic. Players in the mix for the Maggies are Southern and Markov. For the Cats, their players in the mix are Duncan and Wiltshire. The players injured for the Maggies are Harrison, Johnson, McRae, McInnes, Mitchell, Schultz, and maybe more. And for the Cats, they'll be missing Buse, Braun, Burke, Conway, Edwards, Henry, Hoffman, Martin, Moyler. So many players injured for the Cat. Just look at the two teams. They're both pretty close. They know how to play the MCG, but the game's at the MCG and it's more of a Collingwood home ground. And they've got a longer break because Collingwood played on a Friday, Anzac Day, whereas Geelong played on a Sunday. Therefore, Collingwood has 2 days break. They're on a 6-game winning streak. They know how to play the MCG. I'm going to select Collingwood in a close one to beat Geelong by 8 points. The next game is between West Coast Eagles and Melbourne Demons to be played at the Stadium in Western Australia. Last week, West Coast Eagles lost to the Hawks and Melbourne had a good win against Richmond. The players in the mix for the Eagles are Brockman, Gross and Brock. For the D's, their players in the mix are Howes, Billings and Johnson. The players injured for the Eagles are Chesler, Sheed and Yo. For the D's, they'll be missing Hoare, Lever, McAdam, Moitz Wakefield and Turner. Where the game will be won at, it's the midfield. If you compare the ruck midfield set of both sides, for the Eagles you're Flynn and ruck, then Diagon, Hutchinson, Reid, Hunt and Jamie Cripps. For the D's you're Max Gordon ruck with Petrarca, Langford, Windsor, Winey and Lindsay. And just looking at the two teams' ruck midfield setup, I expect the D's to win more of the hit-outs and contested possession and the clearances. Therefore, they're going to provide enough inside 50 for the Forwards to score plenty of goals. And therefore, I'm going to tip the D's to beat West Coast Eagles by 22 points. The next game is between Sydney Swans and GWS Giants. It's the Derby, Battle of the Bridge. Last week, the Swans lost to Gold Coast Suns by 48 points, and one stage they were up by 30-odd points, and in the third quarter, the Swans gave 10 consecutive goals, whereas the Giants lost at home in Canberra to the Doggies by 32 points. The players in the mix of the Swannies are Hamling, Sheldrick and Mitchell. For the Giants, their players in the mix are Brown, Alia, Leake and Cogniglio. The players injured for the Swans are Adams, Amadi, Andrew, Cunningham, Patowi, Fox, Gordon, Mills and Papley. The Giants will be missing Daniels, Hannaford and Logan Smith. Just looking at those two teams, the Swans have got so many key gun players out. You're missing the class of Papley, Captain Mills, one elite kickers All-Australian, Gordon, centre-half forward Amadi and Taylor Adams. They've just got so many quality players out, and therefore, due to this number of injuries, I'm going to tip the Giants to beat Sydney Swans at the SCG on the Sunday. The next game of the week, played on a Sunday afternoon, is between Hawthorn and Richmond Tigers at the MCG. Hawthorn had a good win over West Coast Eagles last week, and the Tigers lost to Melbourne Demons. The players in the mix for the Hawks are CJ, Bruce and McGuinness. For the Tigers, their players in the mix are Sonsi, Braun, Smith and Bolter. The players injured for the Hawks are Day, Deere, Lewis and Scafield. For the Tigers, they'll be missing Armstrong, Gipkers, Houghton, Larford, Prestia, Ryan and Young. Hawthorn, they're in win now mode, premiership contention, and a team that's expected to be top 4. Richmond are rebuilding, and everyone is forecasting the Tigers to be in the bottom 4. And just looking at the two paths of the two teams, one is young, one is in premiership window. I'm going to tip Hawthorn to beat Richmond Tigers by 45 points. The last game of the week is the Q Clash Derby between Brisbane Lions and Gold Coast Suns to play on the Sunday evening at the Gabba. Last week, the Lions had a good 45-point win at Marble Stadium against the Saints, and the Suns beat Sydney Swans by 38 points while trailing by 30-odd points at one stage. So good win for the Gold Coast Suns. The players in the mix for the Lions are Marshall, Fort and Payne. For Gold Coast Suns, their players in the mix are Closey, Moyle and Fiorini. The players injured for the Lions are Cohen, McCarthy and Maville. The Suns will be missing Ballard, Berry and Lombard. Where the game will be won at, it's the midfield of both sides. For the Lions, the ruck midfield setup of McInerney and ruck with the midfields of Dunkley, Neal, Bailey, Berry, Fletcher. You've got some gun players in the midfield for the Lions. For the Suns, in ruck, you got Witts, he's a good ruckman. Then you got players like Humphrey, Anderson, Miller, gun player, Rao, inside, outside extractor, and Weller. Just looking at the two midfields, Brisbane's got all these premiership players, and I just expect the class of the Brisbane Lions midfields to dominate and win more clearances and stoppages, and therefore the Lions will have a lot of inside 50. And Hitwood had a good game last week against the Saints where he kicked like 4 goals. I expect Hitwood to do well, and also former Gold Coast Suns player Sam Day to do well against his old side, and therefore I'm going to tip the Lions to beat the Gold Coast Suns by 19 points. So there are my tips for round 8. Thank you for watching my video, and it will be appreciated if you can subscribe and comment to my videos. Hopefully you enjoyed my video, and see you next time. Cheers or bye.